This is VOA News. I'm David Byrd. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has signed articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump and delivered them to the U.S. Senate so a trial can begin next week. Speaking, that is, before signing the articles, Pelosi said the president had violated his oath to uphold and defend the U.S. Constitution.
The president takes a special oath, a little different from the congressional oath. In fact, he takes an oath that was taken by President George Washington, the patriarch of our country.
The Senate will officially accept the charges on Thursday afternoon. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the process is difficult but is good for the country.
I'm confident this body can rise above short-termism and factional fever and serve the long-term best interest of our nation. We can do this, and we must.
The trial on the charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress is expected to start next week. Trump's Republican Party holds a majority in the Senate, and the body is expected to acquit him of all charges. President Trump and China's chief negotiator signed a modest trade agreement that will diffuse a conflict that has slowed global growth. AP's Mike Hempen reports.
The so-called Phase 1 of the pact will ease some sanctions on China and require the Chinese to increase their purchases of U.S. farm products. The deal will leave in place tariffs on about $360 billion worth of Chinese imports. But Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says American consumers should not be affected.
We've managed these tariffs so that mostly all of the consumer goods are not impacted.
The more challenging issues that address sources of trade and economic tensions between the U.S. and China are expected to be discussed in future negotiations. Mike Hempen, Washington.
This is VOA News. Russian President Vladimir Putin has promoted Mikhail Mishustin, the head of Russia's tax service, to head the country's government. As Lauren Anthony of Reuters reports, that capped an extraordinary day in which Putin proposed major constitutional amendments and accepted the resignation of the government of his longtime Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev.
The announcement came shortly after Putin proposed a vote on constitutional amendments that would shift power from the presidency to parliament. Putin's presidential term ends in 2024. But although he hasn't said what he wants to do next, the changes would allow him to, theoretically, enter an enhanced role as Prime Minister instead at the end of the term. In a national address on Wednesday, he said that the Constitution was adopted over a quarter of a century ago to cope with a political crisis, and that times have drastically changed since then. He's already been Prime Minister in the past. He's been President or Prime Minister for 20 years.
Reuters' Lauren Anthony reporting. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called for national unity Wednesday after an eruption of protests over Iran's downing of a Ukrainian International Airlines plane in which 176 people died. Iran initially said mechanical problems had caused the jetliner to crash, before admitting days later that Iranian military personnel had mistakenly shot it down. In an address broadcast live on state television, Rouhani said if there was a delay by the military to disclose information about the disaster, let them apologize. The revelation that Iran was responsible for downing the aircraft has sparked days of protests as people express their anger at the country's leaders. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has announced the inductees for this year. AP's Margie Zaraletta tells us who it is.
On the one hand, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame will be more diverse by inducting Whitney Houston and the Notorious B.I.G. On the other hand, are they rock and roll? This year's other inductees are the Doobie Brothers, Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails, and T-Rex. The Doobie Brothers are the only act to finish in the top 5 of the fan vote, behind the Dave Matthews Band and Pat Benatar, and ahead of Soundgarden and Judas Priest. Those votes were tallied with the music industry members' ballots. The May 2nd induction ceremony in Cleveland will be broadcast live for the first time on HBO. I'm Margie Zaraletta.
And 2 U.S. agencies say the decade that just ended was by far the hottest ever measured on Earth. NASA and NOAA also calculated that 2019 was the second hottest year in 140 years of record keeping. Scientists say there's no doubt at all that it is due to man-made climate change. I'm David Byrd, VOA News.